You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter. I'm author of this book, Consider My... Yeah, you get that nice ring. This book, Consider My Servant Job, commentary on the book of Job, so you'll get a head start on the Old Testament for next year and wow your friends. This is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I just try and get to the point with some of these lessons. I don't go on for 9 hours talking about 3 verses. You're busy, you can play this twice as fast. So here we go. Today's theme is people in the priesthood order. And we're going to talk about Warren Cowdery, Oliver Cowdery's brother. Did you know he had a brother? I don't want to spoil a surprise. The other one is Lyman Sherman. Now, Lyman Sherman, along with, I'm drawing a blank right now. Lyman Sherman is one of the 2 people I'd like to meet. The other one is, I'm drawing a blank on him. That's really funny. I really like him. So he's the Murdoch. Murdoch's the other one I would have liked to have met. Lyman Sherman and Brother Murdoch, who is the father of the 2 children that Joseph and Emma Smith adopted. One of the 2 people. Lyman Sherman has a very interesting story. It's going to shock you. It may even cause a little bit of a faith crisis about what happened. But let's get into this. So section 106 talks about Warren Cowdery. Now, he is a physician, an apothecary, a pharmacist, or what you in the United Kingdom call a chemist. I know some of you Brits sometimes peek into my podcast because I see it come up. So, good day, mate. Joseph Smith paper has a lot of entries about him. He served vigorously in the church, but later became dissatisfied, and he stayed in Kirtland. That's kind of an interesting. You have friends who are like that. They don't believe in the church, but at least they're decent, and not all people leave the church attack the church. That's a trope or a meme or a saying that gets ricocheted around the church, and it's not true. I remember hearing this one brother teaching a lesson that people leave the church because they're offended, and it's funny. We said, well, no, there's different reasons. He just ignored us and kept on teaching. That's how high priest groups went sometimes. So Warren Cowdery. Now, this section is a beautiful blessing. It reads like a elegant, butterfly, beautiful patriarchal blessing. And you always wonder, how could you abandon the church when you have this beautiful blessing? It's called to be a presiding high priest, and you see the evolving church structure. Early on, they started out with the branches and conferences, and didn't have the ward and stake setup that we have now, so you might not be familiar with some of the terminology. He's told, seek diligently the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness. Sound familiar? And all things necessary shall be added thereunto. That's interesting. As you sacrifice to do the work of the church, the Lord will bless you. And we sometimes have this issue is I like to set up a ministering visit. Well, I'm busy. Well, I got this, I got that going on. Because there's something that you could let go of to make this happen. So we're not just trying to reset up the same appointment. Seek first the kingdom of God, and the necessary things will get added to you, time-wise, financial-wise. Now think about that quote in terms of the second coming. We work in the light of Christ's atonement, but what about working in the context of the second coming as we seek first to build up the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, to build it up and to establish His righteousness? That's what we need to be doing to prepare the earth for the second coming. Remember, this is the latter days. Section 1 talks about the calamity that's coming. You have affirmation and warning. Joy in heaven when repented, but he's warned about the vanity of his heart, and that later overcame him. Now keep in mind, you have this on Wikipedia, on the page about him, there's an interesting letter that was written about him, and people are criticizing him in Warren Parish. So if someone in your newspaper, or in our days a social media post criticizing you, or which occasionally happens to me, people criticizing my comments in church, are you ready to turn the other cheek and letting them strike the other one if necessary? So, there's a temptation to sit in judgment of him, but he just disappeared from the church to the point as we don't know a lot about him. You sometimes have that with some people. They're mentioned the Doctrine and Covenants, and we may have like a birth certificate or one census record, but they just faded away into oblivion. That's section 106. Section 107 is a very long section. Now, it's interesting. This section parallels There's this talk Joseph Smith gave. You can find it in Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, page 166, and you can read it to the end. Or in our good friend, the Joseph Smith Manual. You still have this, using it as a doorstop or a balancing for your couch when it gets a little bit lopsided? Or are you reading this and treasuring the truths? Chapter 6, Chapter 8 covers the same material in this talk. It got split apart because, the chapters organized a little bit differently along topics rather than, the sermons. It's a connection of several revelations, and that's why it sometimes seems disjointed and repetitive. The middle part of it, about Adam and Amen, was a patriarchal blessing given to Joseph Smith Sr., and the first parts and the last part of this section were given at different times, and Joseph Smith combined them together. So we have this idea that this is all just given straight out of heaven, and no, there's editing going on. For example, there's some scholarship to the effect that Isaiah chapter 1, it wasn't written by Isaiah, but was written by the compilers of the book. Now, it's interesting, Isaiah chapter 1 is missing from the Book of Mormon. So what you're reading is true. It's not in the historical sequence, but it's factually and spiritually correct. It's interesting, once again, the context of branches and conferences versus the wards and stake we do now, and the councils. The church organization was different than how we do it now. It changes as we get continuing revelation. We have this new expression, ongoing restoration, which is the same thing. I mean, we're just constantly getting revelation. We're not getting locked into things. So let's dive into the section. There's two priesthood. There's the Aaronic priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthood. The Aaronic priesthood is an appendage to the Melchizedek priesthood. And as Joseph Smith taught, all priesthoods Melchizedek, and there's just degrees and portions of it. All authority comes from the Melchizedek priesthood. And that include setting apart with the female organizations. Now keep in mind, in the church, well, in churches of the world, you're either ordained or you're unordained. However, the church, we have a different category: ordained, set apart, and unordained. And that's what throws people off when they talk about ordained woman, is we operate with this different model. They're trying to impose the secular Christianity's model upon the church, and it just falls apart because set apart, you're operating under the direction of the priest. It's the same thing with a Sunday school president. They actually used to ordain Sunday school presidents high priest, since it was a presidency, and that's the point of the high priesthood. But they don't hold keys, but they are certainly operating under priesthood authorization and authority. So all authority comes from the Melchizedek priesthood. As you read this talks about elders and high priest. It talks about the Melchizedek priesthood, how it has the power of spiritual blessings. How's this for you? Now think about this when you're going to a ward council meeting, or the type of conversations that go on in your quorum meetings. The power and authority of the higher or Melchizedek priesthood is to hold the keys of all the spiritual blessings of the church, to have the privilege of receiving the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. Wait a minute, that's a mystery. Well, you Melchizedek priesthood has the privilege of receiving the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. Now, in one sense, a mystery is just something that's unknown that gets revealed to you, but it also refers to the endowment. Hey, I'm doing this podcast, and the phone says this is potential spam. Bye-bye, potential spam. Now I'll get back to preaching the gospel. So, mysteries, that also refers to the endowment. If you read the Harold B. Lee manual, that's where the source of that comes from. They've receiving the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, to have the heavens open to them, to commune with the general assembly and church of the firstborn, and to enjoy the communion and presence of God the Father and Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. Now remember, presence of God, that's celestial kingdom. The presence of Jesus, that's actually terrestrial kingdom. So this is a celestial, to get the people in the presence and have communion with God the Father and Jesus Christ. Second comforter, and what I call the third comforter. I mean, that's not the term used, that Joseph Smith never used, but it just follows as a matter of course, that you have the first comforter, the second comforter, and the third comforter would be the Father. That's part of our God. That's not some esoteric thing that we don't talk about. It's in the scriptures, and to the degree which our tradition, culture, and folklore occults that doctrine, there's a problem. The Aaronic priesthood, carnal commandments, outward ordinances, temporal things. I knew a person who met with his bishop, and the bishop said he couldn't give him temporal advice. The bishop is a Aaronic priesthood office, and he is within his rights to do that. And because this bishop did not understand the doctrine, a blessing was missed out. A blessing was lost, forfeited, because the bishop, somewhere along the line, did not have this understanding that a bishop is a temporal office, and so he can give temporal counsel. The power and authority of the lesser or Aaronic priesthood is to hold the keys of the ministering of angels. So Melchizedek priesthood deals with gods, and the Aaronic priesthood deals with angels. And to administer the outward ordinances, the letter of the gospel, the baptism of repentance for the remission of sins, agreeable to the covenants and commandments. Once again, the expression covenants and commandments refers to section 20. Read the new heading on it. Then it talks about the needs for presidents in these quorums, that you need to have a leader. Of course, there's that oxymoronic joke about the leader of the anarchist movement, but other faiths are decentralized. Islam, Judaism. Eastern Orthodoxy is interesting because they don't have an Eastern Orthodox pope, but they have, autonomous, autocephalous, the Eastern Orthodox churches along national or state lines, Russian, Estonian, Ukrainian, etc. So it's a little bit different organization, but still they just don't have a unified group. For example, you'll go to a city like Oakland, and Oakland has a Greek Orthodox, and in San Francisco they'll have Russian Orthodox. Okay, well, which is it? Well, you don't have it. You just have it all Catholic diocese in Oakland and in San Francisco. So you have the president of the church, the first presidency, and remember Joseph F. Smith talked about there being three presidents. There's not just one president, but three presidents, and that comes up when we have, like with President Benson or President Kimball, where you have the church presidents incapacitated. This whole thing with President Nelson being a centenarian, 101 years old, that's really new. It's exciting. It's kind of fun. I mean, just if anyone living over 100 years is just interesting, but now it's the president of our church. The quorum of the 12 apostles are called to be special witnesses of the name of Christ. Not special witnesses of Christ, of the name of Christ. Read the text. We mentally smudge that out, and it causes a doctrinal dissonance, a doctrinal distortion. When you talk about the name, Professors McConkie and Millett at BYU wrote about that. Dallin H. Oakes has written about that. He said he actually enjoyed writing that book. That's one of his favorite books to write about, in his holy name. Abraham 1:18, put upon thee my name, even the priesthood of thy father. It deals with authority. Section 63:62. For behold, verily I say that many there be who are under this condemnation, who use the name of the Lord and use it in vain, not having authority. See, the office of an apostle, it's about Jesus Christ, but it also makes sure you understand the authority, because Jews have a version of the Messiah, Catholics have a version of Jesus, Eastern Orthodox, the different churches have different versions of Jesus Christ. Different Protestant denominations view Christ differently, although it's sort of smudging right now. You have these things called Bible churches or non-denominational churches where they get past the traditional boundaries and division that were very prominent in Joseph Smith's day. But you need a witness of the authority, that we do have a church that's authorized to do these things. It's not a seminar where you just teach truths and, oh, I feel motivated now. This is ordinances. Authorized. You need authorization to teach things. I had to be called by a prophet and be set apart in order to be a missionary. I had to have the authorization. And that's crucial. And we sort of this non-denominational egalitarianism, ecumenism that we're kind of going to is going to be problematic if you don't understand your witness of the name, the authority of Jesus Christ. In fact, the first presidency issued this statement. It said this: two great truths, and this will sound familiar if you read J. Reuben Clark's the chartered course of the church, because I think he may have written both in both cases. He said, two great truths must be accepted by mankind if they shall save themselves. First, that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the only begotten, the very Son of God, whose atoning blood and resurrection save us from the physical and spiritual death brought to us by the fall. And Next, that God again has restored to the earth in these last days through the prophet Joseph his holy priesthood with the fullness of the everlasting gospel for the salvation of all men on the earth. Without these truths, man may not hope for the riches of the life hereafter. The quorum of the 70 are special witnesses unto the Gentiles and to all the world. So is there a difference between a special witness and an especial witness? A special, that's more of archaic Shakespearean language. Dallin H. Oakes said he couldn't see a difference, and that's the consensus from what I understand. It says witnesses unto the Gentiles and all the world, which is a little bit different. It seems like it's interesting because Gentiles and under all the world would seem to be a similar expression. I'm not a 70, so I don't. You get the general sense that you're supposed to be preaching the gospel and witnessing of Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith. But it's interesting, they work under the direction of the 12, so the 12 presides of the 12, but also has this direction over the 70. And when you have a conference where the 70 show up, they're actually directed by Elder Hall or President Holland of the Quorum of the 12. Now it's interesting, you see this expression, equal and authority. At the death of the president of the church, the Quorum of the 12 takes over, and this sometimes happens where the president dies, and I'll talk about the counselors, but J. Reuben Clark was really precise about this. When the president of the church died, he'd understand that he reverted back to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He introduced himself as, I'm Elder J. Reuben Clark. I remember at President Hinckley's funeral, they talked about President Monson as being, his counselor, and that's not the correct term. It's true, but he is Thomas S. Monson, president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. This happened with President Russell M. Nelson when he is between the reorganization of the 12, he started issuing mission calls. So there are people out there who have mission calls signed by Russell M. Nelson, president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And it was within his right. This is where it comes from, that they're equal authority. So when the first presidency is gone, the 12 functions as the first presidency. Well, if the 12 apostles goes, the Quorum of the 12 takes over. So you have the 7 presidents become the presidency of the church, and you have the 7th president, who's the senior president, becomes, for all intents and purposes, the president of the church because of that. What happens, I covered this earlier in a podcast, what happens if they're all killed out, then what would happen is if you got down to the last elder would again reorganize the church, and it'd be inherent in their ordination. Although that's kind of a wild thing. You need angelic ministration to restore keys, since as a high priest have not expressly been given keys, but to have the ability to reorganize the church. So that's the potential answer, but you'd have to get revelation to figure it out. Like who's the senior, when it's senior in ordination, they'd probably be the leader. But there is a backup plan. There is a plan in place. It talks about the decisions of these quorums being unanimous. And, early in the church, they'd follow parliamentary procedures, Robert Rules of Order. Now it's a little bit different. It talks about these character attributes that you read in 2 Peter chapter 1, and you're probably more familiar with section 4. As a missionary, I and a lot of you memorize that in 2 languages. It talks about character attributes to get revelation. And that's the thing with Preach My Gospel, to shift from behaviors of the commitment pattern to attributes of a missionary. You don't rely upon private correspondences with from letters with general authorities. For example, there's always this debate about evolution. One of the professors at the U of U, I'm sorry, I'm skipping his name, I'm doing this extemporaneously, wrote a letter to David O. McKay about Joseph Fielding Smith's book, Man, His Origin, His Destiny, and Elder President McKay responded, no, it's not an official publication of the church. Well, that's not the right question. The right question is, one, is what's the correct theory of man's origin? And it's a funny letter because the church has already issued 2 statements on evolution, Joseph F. Smith and Heber J. Grant. And so why are you asking this question when you already know the answer? You're trying to find a reason not to believe something. But, I've had private conversations with general authority, and I keep them to myself. I'm a relative of David O. McKay, or I should say David B. Haight, excuse me. I'm a relative of David B. Haight, Oakley in Cassia County, That's where my dad's from. I'm a relative of him. So there's stuff I just kind of keep to myself, and it's none of your business. So Quorum of the 12 and High Councils. There are two stakes, one in Kirtland and one in Zion or in Missouri. And of course, this model doesn't quite work right now, is that you have the standing High Councils in the stake, and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles is a traveling High Council. And for those of you on the High Council, think about this. You're sort of the same function as the Quorum of the 12 Apostles does in resolving concerns, membership councils, etc. Evangelical ministers, that refers to stake patriarchs. And that goes back to Joseph Smith, where he explained that a evangelical minister is what we call a stake patriarch. It's interesting, in the community of Christ, they use the term evangelical ministers as opposed to patriarchs. So, kind of trivia for your class. Now we get to the flashback to Adam-on-Diamond with the history of the patriarchal priesthood, and this elegant prophecy from Adam, bowed down with age but vibrating with power, prophesying to the end of his family. Beautiful, and you still want to argue about evolution. Then it goes back to the priesthood office. It's interesting terminology, and I've said this in other podcasts, that when you read the expression the high priesthood, sometimes it refers to the Melchizedek priesthood, and sometimes it refers to the office of high priest. And it raises some concerns. Now, I was an elder for a really long time. It was my late 40s, my mid 40s when I was ordained a high priest. In fact, I haven't even been a high priest a decade now. I don't recommend it. I don't think it was really constructive. I don't think it made me a better person by delaying the ordination. Can any man forbid water, said Peter. Can any man forbid an ordination? I respond to that. But there seems to be a connection with the office of high priest and the first presidency, because that's one of the titles, president of the high priesthood. Does that refer to the high priest or to the Melchizedek priesthood, or both? Then we talk about the bishops, their roles, that he had two presiding bishops at the time, or regional bishops might be a better term. Talked about how to resolve different cases, difficult cases with the 12. Then you get something that's going to bother some people. Verse 82 talks about how to excommunicate the president of the church. Now, the saying, and this was something Wilford Woodruff said, and you can read it in the Manifesto, Official Declaration 1, and the statements below it. I think the earliest person was Brigham Young, the saying that if the president of the church is going to lead the church astray, he'd be removed from office. So the Lord would remove him from office. That's true, but the mortal mechanism of this is to hold a disciplinary council or membership council for the president of the church. And as you read this section, you're reading about the membership council on how to excommunicate a president of the church. Yeah, so if there's a problem, you're expecting a lightning bolt from heaven to come down to solve the problem. No. There has to be a membership council, and it's happened with the 2.5 excommunications that have happened during my life. George P. Lee, James Hamula, then the censorship, that sort of this vague censorship that happened to Elder Paul H. Dunn. All of them were 70s. So the first two were excommunicated, then Paul H. Dunn was given a type of censorship and some type of suspension. We're vague on what happened, and this may be a good thing not to be too nosy about. But this is what John A. Widsoe, in his book Priesthood and Church Government, said on page 212. Should the occasion ever arise that one of the first presidency must be tried for crime or neglect of duty, his case would come before the presiding bishop with his counselors, and the 12 high priests especially chosen for the purpose. This would be a tribunal extraordinary, for which there is no appeal. So presumably I think the reason why I'd have to go with the keys, because the president of the church holds the keys over the Melchizedek priesthood, the presiding bishop holds the keys of the Aaronic priesthood, and he chose 12, presumably the quorum of the 12 apostles, to help adjudicate the matter. So it's not really doctrine, or if you're expecting there's a problem that a lightning bolt comes out. And so when you've had some questions about Adam God theory or about exaltation or what the correct name of the church is, this is the procedure that you're reading for resolving those issues when presidents of the church say those things. Let me catch a breather. We're at 25 minutes. My limit's about half an hour, 40 minutes for me talking, and how some of these podcasters go on for 2 hours is beyond me. So we're going to talk about quorum sizes. As you read these, there's different quorum sizes: 12, 24, 48, 96, 70, 12, and 3. The first presidency is a quorum. It's interesting, both the 12 and then the deacons quorum have the size 12. I don't know if there's any significance to it, what's special about the number 12. These quorum sizes are based on factors of 12. So there you go. It's interesting, back in the 40s, 30s and 40s, where in Salt Lake City, they'd have larger families, is more residential, so you'd have wards with multiple deacons and teachers and priest quorums. I'm not sure about priest quorums. That's 48's kind of big. But I wonder if this is going to come and play during the millennium, where we'll have a higher birth rate. It's not like we're now, where everyone's just not marrying. But you have these quorum sizes. Now this is a pet peeve. I'm on my soapbox right now. I'm bringing this up because I've seen devastating consequences. The elders quorum is 96. You read that in there. Brigham Young and Wilford Woodruff's journal on October 29th, 1876 said as much, reaffirmed this. John Taylor in Journal of Discourses, Volume 19, page 52, said this. Spencer W. Kimball in April of 1974 said this. But we're getting a lot of, I've seen a lot of pushback. We've had divided quorums. Sometimes the bishops don't want to do that, and I don't know why stake presidents let bishops overwrite doctrine. I'm not sure why stake presidents let bishops overwrite doctrine. They think they can ignore this. This is a revelation. It overworks the elders quorum presidents. I think we're going through this in our ward, where for the longest time they didn't divide the quorum, and it's had a very ravaging effect. Not ravishing, but ravaging effect, where people kind of tune out because the elders quorum the elders president cannot manage it. The revelations, okay, Jesus Christ has keys to the universe. He said, I want these quorums divided at 96. Joseph Smith has keys of the kingdom. Quorums divided at 96. Brigham Young, John Taylor, Spencer W. Kimball, keys of the kingdoms, presidents of the church, you divide at 96. And a bishop who holds keys over the ward, that's outside the scope of authority to change doctrine, ignore this. They don't want to divide the quorum, and it just does not work. This is what Joseph Fielding Smith, also held keys of the kingdom, president of the church, in Doctrines of Salvation, Volume 1, page 3. This is what he said. The Lord has established all things in order and has given us a perfect system. We cannot improve upon it. If we would carry out that which the Lord has revealed as he has revealed it, then all things would be perfect. For the organization is a perfect organization. The theory of it, the plan of it, is without flaw. If we followed all the orders that have been given to us in the priesthood and otherwise, if we'd put into practice the great doctrines which have been revealed in the revelations contained in the Holy Scriptures, it would only be a matter of a very short time until this great people would be in the same condition, absolutely, as were the people of the city of Enoch. You want to establish Zion? You divide that quorum. And then you look into your heart saying, why am I bucking and kicking against the pricks with this revelation? Is it a misplaced sense of community? But where does disobedience get you? Disobedience, this neglect of not dividing the quorum, where does it get you? What happens to you? You just might get released before you see the negative consequences of this disobedience, because that's what it is. If you exercise faith and divide those quorums, that opens the windows of heavens for blessings. As Joseph Fielding Smith said, you follow the plan, you get the city of Enoch. You ignore this plan, and you're just inviting the devil as your guest speaker, the fireside starring the devil. Section 93. And it is according to the vision showing the order of the 70. Now, we talked about this earlier in the Revelation, is that when Joseph Smith would get these revelations, we have the written aspect, the one that the scribe with a feather in his hand writes down, but there's a visual mental aspect, and you saw this when Joseph Smith was getting the visitation from Moroni. Joseph Smith mentioned he got a picture where the hill Cumorah was in his head, so he would recognize it as Moroni was explaining it to him. And you had this too. You saw a visual component to how the 70 were to be organized. So that's the general authorities. Then you get this catch-all verse. Whereas other officers of the church who belong not unto the 12, neither the 70, are not under the responsibility to travel among all nations, but are to travel as their circumstances shall allow. Notwithstanding, they may hold as high and responsible offices in the church. So that sounds like a little bit constitutional legalese. And what this is talking about is you have the general authority as the top three tiers and the presiding bishopric. But then what do you do in the middle between the bishops and the stake presidents? How does that work? The stake level, the ward level. Well, over time we've had these different intermediary offices, assistants to the 12, regional representatives, area authorities, which later turned to the office of area 70s, and they're based upon this scripture. Now, it's interesting, there's a revelation given to President John Taylor, 14th of April, 1833, and this is found in, you can find it in Messages of the First Presidency, because John Taylor was worried about this, is that you have the stake and the general authorities, and what's going on between, because there's just an increase of work. Thus saith the Lord unto the First Presidency, unto the 12, unto the 70s, and unto all my holy priesthood. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither be concerned about the management and organization of my church and priesthood and the accomplishment of my work. Fear me and observe my laws, and I will reveal unto you from time to time through the channels that I have appointed everything that shall be necessary for the future development and perfection of my church, for the adjustment and rolling forth of my kingdom, and for the building up of and the establishment of Zion. For ye are my priesthood, and I am your God, even so I am. Amen. Messages of the First Presidency, Volume 2, page 354. So the Lord said, I give you these revelations, but there's always more to come. You're going to get these incremental revelations. From time to time, they're going to tweak stuff, and as the church gets bigger, we're having more 70s. I think there's 12 quorum to 70 now. When I was born, they didn't even have a general quorum. They just had the First Presidency, called the First Council of 70, which is just a 7 presidency. But they had the assistants to the 12, but it got bigger and cumbersome, so they started adding more general authorities and area authorities. Now, the section ends as every man learn his duty and act. Now, how many problems would we have if people were reading this section and acting on it? Where bishops would feel comfortable about not dividing a quorum. We'd have better priesthood meetings if we read this beforehand. Now, section 108, my voice is starting to give out. I filmed another podcast before this one. I may not have rested enough, so I'm getting a little raspy, kind of like Harrison Ford. Point 108, Lyman Sherman. Along with John Murdoch, Lyman Sherman is one of the people I want to meet, and this may shake your faith a bit. He was in Zion's camp. He was one of the 7 presidents. And he gets a revelation about being more careful in observing his vows, and he is told to prepare for the endowment. Now here's the rest of the story. This is from the life of by Orson F. Whitney's book about the life of Heber C. Kimball, and there's this revelation given to Joseph Smith. It will be necessary for you to get the 12 together, ordain such as have not been ordained, or at least such of them as you can get, and proceed to regulate the elders, as the Lord may give you wisdom. We nominate George A. Smith and Lyman Sherman to take the places of Orson Hyde and Thomas B. Marsh. So, Lyman Sherman, along with George A. Smith, grandfather of George Albert Smith, were nominated to fill the quorum of the 12 apostles. And you find it in the Joseph Smith paper, letter to Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young. So, in the life of Lyman Sherman, or life of Heber C. Kimball, this is what it says. On February 7th, 1839, says Apostle Kimball, I accompanied Brother Brigham to Far West, when we left there, Lyman Sherman was somewhat unwell, and a few days after our return, he died. We did not notify him of his appointment. So Lyman Sherman died not knowing that he'd been called to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So the short answer is you forgive all people involved. You don't have all the facts to make a judgment. But that's something to think about. I think about that left and right all day long. And I wonder if they had notified him, if he would have recovered. If they had placed their hands on him and ordained him to the office of apostle and given him the keys, would Lyman Sherman have recovered? Would he have died anyways? Did Heavenly Father want Lyman Sherman to go into the spirit world as an apostle with apostolic authority and keys? Did that screw up work in the spirit world because Lyman Sherman was not ordained an apostle? It seems like it, but as always, that's a soft conclusion. There's always an asterisk appointed to that. I don't understand this. I'll tell you this just because I'm winding down this podcast. One of the things that always bothered me about being an elder for so long is that it limited my ability to serve the church, and I was always concerned about dying as an elder and having my authority limited. That if I die as a high priest, I take that office with me into the next life. Wilford Woodruff talked about how you maintain your same priesthood and quorum office when you die. So you high priest go with the high priest elder, and that keeping me an elder so long, would that cause, if I were to die, would that cause problems in the spirit world when you could have easily ordained me a high priest? Now I'm ordained, it's not really an issue, and that's where you max out as a member of the church. That's why I think about this, because something like this sort of almost happened to me. So take that for what it is. A man was ordained. He just told him, okay, yeah, tell him that they've been ordained. They weren't specifically told to ordain him. If he is sick, why didn't they heal him? Why did they withhold this information from him? So that's one of those question marks of history that you don't read about in the CS letter, but that's something that really I really think about a lot. Not ordaining people, older brethren not being ordained high priests when you're working with high priests that are 10 years younger than you. That does make a difference. So we're at the end. Christ quotient, the atonement quotient. So this is about church machinery, church organization, the church structure, offices and quorums, and the duties of the various priesthood offices. And we always have a problem of church machinery getting in the way of Christ's message. The mechanics, budget, setting up the folding chairs. Did you just get ordained to the priesthood so you could set up folding chairs? If we were to inform ourselves of our priesthood duties and understand the purpose of the church is to get people to have the second comforter, as it says, communion with God the Father in His Son Jesus Christ, not to organize bungee jumping. Makes all the difference in the world. If you go up to church, you think the church is to provide pancake breakfast to people, or I'm supposed to get you to Jesus Christ. How seriously do you take Isaiah after reading this? What changes do you feel like you need to make with your attitudes towards church? Church machinery exists to get the message out, to bless people, and not to staff positions. You don't see a new family in the world. It's like, how can you pick this family apart to fill out these callings? Learn your duty. Second coming quotient. Using church machinery to prepare the earth. Is the second coming an agenda item in your ward council meeting, in your quorum council? When you teach a lesson, are you thinking about this? When you have Sunday school, the prophets, Russell M. Nelson, have been saying, he's been getting promptings about the second coming to prepare the earth. Okay, and then are you saying, okay, let's talk about this. What are we doing? And then you get the crackpots and wackos come out. But are you getting ready? Magnifying your calling. It's interesting. Recently, last week you had a gentleman by the name of Charlie Kirk who was killed 15 minutes away at Utah Valley University. And it's had an effect upon a lot of people. They're going back to church now. Just like after 9/11, people went back to church. Okay, there's something going on. Where are you at with the church? Are you following the prophet, or does it take like a 9/11 or Charlie Kirk's death to get you to be obedient? How are the elders' quorums working? What's your strategy for dealing with turnover? You're overloaded. You have an overloaded quorum that's over 96 threshold, and there's a lot of turnover. Embracing the pattern is going to solve that. How are you using councils to seek revelation to solve these problems? We didn't talk about council, something President Ballard talked about, published a book about it, gave 2 talks back-to-back in conference. Yeah, we're just kind of letting things slide and sort of wiggle into looseness. Kind of like a lock that kind of gets loose over time. That's what's happening. Warren Cowdery and Lyman Sherman, a case of contrast. Warren Cowdery was dissatisfied. He had a somewhat long life, successful career. Lyman Sherman is an ordained apostle, and he died short. Isaiah chapter 28, verse 1 talks about God's strange act. One of these paradoxes, antinomies, like what's going on here? Why is this person who falls away from the church getting bad, and the man who was ordained it was said, okay, you're going to be an apostle. Why does he die? Why didn't they heal him? All very counterintuitive. But you don't trust in the arm of flesh or the mind of flesh, the carnal mind, but you trust in the mind of Christ. You trust Christ himself. Christ, that's the point.